Today I want to talk about dealing with toxic people. Yeah, just dealing with people. Usually toxic people, narcissistic people, people we got to deal with. A lot of times we go through bouts in our life where we deal with people that just aren't very kind, just not very nice. And a lot of times, we got to deal with these people. Now, typically, there's old stereotypes about INFJs is that we attract narcissist people. Somehow it's something in the character of the INFJ. It's that giving character. It's that empathetic character that narcissists seem to be attracted to the INFJ. Now, early on in my life, I'll say that was true with me. I do remember a few times in my life, I can honestly say that. Maybe when I was a little bit more naive as a young man, and I do remember having more narcissistic, toxic people approach me. But as I got older, that stopped. I think because I threw off a certain presence about me, and it just was an instinctive evolution, just an instinctive way of a presence that I developed that made them think twice. It was just a certain way I held myself. So I'm going to talk about that, dealing with toxic people. Now, people, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about my early life, growing up in Metro Boston. I grew up in a city called Lynn, Massachusetts. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Longfellow had a poem called Lynn, Lynn, the City of Sin. You never go out the way you came in. But I grew up in that city. That's I did. And I got to tell you, people, it was a rough town. Okay, it had a rough element about it. The school systems were rough. I grew up there basically in the 70s, in the 80s, into the 90s. And that was my town. And again, I met friends there. I had friends. I had my brothers and things. My whole family lived there. Through that, there were some moments in there where it was a big city, and it was a tough city. And early on, you had to figure out ways of surviving. And a lot of times, you ended up having to use your dukes. You had to fight, or sometimes you just had to run, depending on the situation. But a lot of times, you had to deal with people that were just not good, that weren't nice to you, let's just say. Now, like I said early on in my life, I think I did attract these narcissist people. I did, because I threw out a certain passiveness. Now, when I was a kid, I was a little more passive. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to be the kid that was fight. I really wasn't. I didn't have a mean streak in me. I wanted to be left alone. I wanted to just keep things peaceful, basically. I really did. And but a lot of times you had a certain somebody that would test the waters. They would start needling you, start calling you names and things. Then they'd start pushing. They'd start getting it. And then every day they'd do that. Now, through a time in my life, I think I was a little more passive. I let it go. I did let it go. Now, also, people, I had 4 older brothers, all right? I did have five boys in my family. I'm the youngest. So I also had brothers that were usually picking on me, let's just say. Being the youngest out of 5, of course, everything kind of rolls downhill at that point. Now, through most of my early life, I was the same way. I usually kind of just took it. I didn't want to pursue that. I just was hoping that if I stayed calm, if I stayed peaceful, they would be peaceful back. But people, it doesn't work like that. I discovered early on in my life that that's not what happens. If you just remain peaceful, it usually just means they start being more aggressive back toward you. So I found that lesson out. And I thought, well, I could do 2 things here. I could just take it, or I'm going to have to fight back. But the thing is, over the course of time of being needled like that, your mind starts going. It just gets more aggressive. You just know that you're not going to let it happen anymore. And just instinctively, you finally lash out. Well, that's what I did. There was a few times where I finally lashed out. I couldn't take it anymore. And yes, I had to fight back. I did that with my brothers. I did that with people in school, things like that. But it got to the point where I understood that the ones that were bothering me, picking on me, but when I finally showed aggression back, they stopped. And I thought, well, that's the only way for people to leave you alone, is you have to stand your ground. That was some of the early years, and like I said, I told you about that. I had some early battles with my elder brothers, and of course, early life, I mean, my mom was in the picture, and she had to deal with my brothers as well. But you found out that a lot of times, I mean, these were just forging moments as well. I was given these older brothers that were giving me a hard time for a reason. It wasn't until years later that I realized that having four older brothers, having my two older ones especially, that were the closest in age to me, they were the most brutal to me. Okay, well, it dawned on me that was part of their forging lesson. It was almost like they were doing me a favor in a way. I kind of turned it into, they were making sure that I learned how to defend myself. I learned how to deal with aggressive people and not to let them get the better of me. So I think a lot of us, that's the lesson we learn. And I'm sure a lot of you had similar backgrounds. I mean, I'm thinking we had, leave some in the comments. Let me know what it was like. And you must have had things like that. When you were growing up, we had to get bullied a little bit before we knew to shove back, and that's where we earned our respect. Okay, but that leads me into just as we got older, and we had to deal with people like bosses, maybe teachers, people in our lives that we had to deal with on a daily basis. Now, through my work life, I've had many jobs, or I've had enough jobs to where I've had bosses or managers, and some of them were kind of not too kind. They had a certain name about them, a-hole kind of thing, and I had a few of those kind of bosses. Some of them in particular, they were never nice, always nasty to you, and some of them they just were never peaceful. They could never be, hello, how you doing this morning? It was just kind of there was always a nastiness about some of them. And I've had a couple of bosses like that. Well, I've had to deal with a few of them over the years, and you got to the point where you kind of knew all you could do is just deal with them without lashing out. You try to deal with them, but if they seem unreasonable, all you could do is point out that they were unreasonable. Say, no, you know what, that's unreasonable what you're asking for. It's the time of day that it is. You knew I needed to get out at a certain time. Now you're going to make sure that minute is right to the 5 o'clock minute where I needed to get out. Things like that would happen, where they would make sure that they scheduled your job where you had to rush back for that time that you said you had to get out on. Things like that. So you learned early on that you just had to adapt to the way their behavior was. And a lot of it just turned back into just certain snappy behaviors back. A lot of times I would mirror them. I had one boss, like I said, you handed him the work paper, he'd snap it out of your hand. He was just like that. He wouldn't be kind and just take it out of your hand, snap it out of your hand. So I started being okay, I mean, we have to mirror these guys sometimes. And I just he'd hand me a piece of paper and I'd snap it out of his hand. And I'd give him a certain look in the eye as if saying, how do you like that? And it would just be the eye contact. But I could see right there he didn't like it. It's but that's what you do to me. So a lot of times that mirroring will actually get them thinking that they don't like it done back to them. So it got little things like that. And of course, over the course of times, they never really got better. They were always themselves. They were always that kind of boss. But a lot of times you had to deal with it. You bite the bullet a little bit. This was your job. You had certain people you had to deal with. But you had to set boundaries where you just weren't letting them walk all over you either. That you had to set certain guidelines that you protected yourself. And a lot of it was just in things that you said and the way you mirrored them back. And so I guess that was the best way that I showed examples that I wasn't too appreciative of what they were doing. Now, okay, that's what I say is that also is you're forging a certain persona, a stoic persona. Now, what I mean by that is, people, over the course of your lifetime, I've noticed that as I got older, when I was a young man, a lot of these things were happening. I was always tested a lot because you were young. You were naive. You're a babe in the woods, basically. And a lot of times this is, you don't know how to deal with people. You have to learn the hard way. And this is the way my life was, basically growing up, learning the hard way. But as I get older, as I learned, as I started dealing, like I said, with these bosses, with certain customers, a lot of truck drivers. I told you I was in the blue-collar field most of my life, and I had to deal with numerous truck drivers through the years. I mean, I was a tire technician, so a lot of times I had to deal with drivers and things. And some of them, 98% of them, were good people. They were decent, very respectful, decent people. I got to tell you that. But there was always that 2% that always had a chip on their shoulder, okay? And they dealt with it, or they were demanding a certain way. But a lot of times you just learn how to deal with these people. But I noticed that a lot of times, instead of snapping back, instead of always arguing back, if they had something to say, I'd always just kind of keep a stoic presence about me. I'd just listen. I'd just watch and just study them as they would say it. I mean, I wouldn't give them a bothered look. I'd just like listen, like they would be mouthing off, and I'd just listen to what they'd have to say. And usually a non-response is a response. A lot of times you just kind of let it go. You hear it, you're absorbing it a little bit. It's not directly affecting you, but you're always making sure that you don't look bothered by what they're doing. Because a lot of times that's what these narcissistic people are doing. They want you bothered. They're going to try to needle you because they want you to be bothered. They want you to be angered. They're looking to do that because that is their power. And as twisted as it is, this is their life. They want to anger you. They want to make you miserable. That's how they're sucking the energy. That's where their energy almost is coming out of you when you're bothered. When you look like you're troubled by what they're doing to you. And this is their power over you. Yes, it's kind of a twisted way, but this is what these people do. And a lot of times you have to let them know that they're not doing that to you, that they can't get you, that you keep a certain presence about you, that when you do something, you don't look like you're bothered or worried. If anything, you put a kind of a half smirk in your face as if you're actually like laughing at them in a way for them trying to do it in the first place. They mirror that back and say, it isn't working. So there's little mind games you play with just eye contact with people over the years. And a lot of times it's snappy comebacks. It's just the way we present ourselves. Now, INFJs through the years, I think that we get pretty good at dealing with certain people in a cerebral way. Just a lot of our ways of presence, just the way we talk to people and things like that. I noticed too that boss I told you about earlier, I had a certain way of just almost instinctively knowing how to handle him. Like he would say certain things, and it wasn't just a matter of mirroring, but I always had a certain comeback, of a certain way of having a comeback that just kind of would baffle them in a lot of ways like that. So a lot of it is, it's not just being aggressive. It's just a way of knowing you have a one-up on them, that you're onto their scheme in a way. You just kind of see them for what they are, and they're not gonna get you. They're not going to get your goat, basically. So that's a lot of times in how you're dealing with them, is just not letting them get under your skin, basically. Through it all, though, people, the ultimate thing is that when you know that you have won, is that they didn't defeat you in any way. A lot of times when you're dealing with somebody, they're hoping to alter you. They're trying to make you bitter. They want to get you bitter. They want you as miserable as them, basically. This is what these narcissist people are. A lot of times they're miserable people. They don't like themselves. They don't like who they are. They don't like what they've become. And they're hoping they can spread their misery to you by getting you to react to them. They're getting you to just be as miserable as them, basically. So through it all, if you can remain stoic, calm, meek, and decent, and just allow that to shine through despite their way of treating you. After they're done with you, after they've said things to you, and if you remain that way, then ultimately they didn't defeat you, when you can still remain who you are and keep that shining presence about you that comes through. Ultimately, that's how you defeat the narcissist people, is that they did not conquer your mind and conquer you to be angry as they were. Okay? All right, well, people, I just said a lot. Listen, a lot of this just comes out. A lot of these are just experiences, life experiences that I've had through the years. And this is how a lot of times how it's unfolded for me and how to deal with people and through the course of my life. Well, people, if you like this segment, please give me the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and let me know if you like this kind of content. Till I see you again, have yourself a wonderful rest of your day.